And finally, as the committee is aware, I wrote that withholding security assistance in exchange for help with a domestic political campaign in the United States would be crazy. I believed that then, and I believe it now.
Ambassador Taylor, in your decades of military service and diplomatic service representing the United States around the world, have you ever seen another example of foreign aid conditioned on the personal or political interests of the President of the United States?
No, Mr. Goldman, I've not. But President Trump did insist that President Zelensky go to a microphone and say he is opening investigations of Biden and 2016 election interference. Last Friday, a member of my staff told me of events that occurred on July 26th. While Ambassador Volker and I visited the front, this member of my staff accompanied Ambassador Sondland. Ambassador Sondland met with Mr. Yermak. Following that meeting, in the presence of my staff, at a restaurant, Ambassador Sondland called President Trump and told him of his meetings in Kyiv. The member of my staff could hear President Trump on the phone asking Ambassador Sondland about the investigations. Ambassador Sondland told President Trump the Ukrainians were ready to move forward. Following the call with President Trump, the member of my staff asked Ambassador Sondland what President Trump thought about Ukraine. Ambassador Sondland responded that President Trump cares more about the investigations of Biden, which Giuliani was pressing for. At the time I gave my deposition on October 22nd, I was not aware of this information. I'm including it here for completeness.
Now, before we fall into the inevitable GOP smear campaigns about how Ambassador Bill Taylor is a never-Trumper, deep state Democrat getting paid off by George Soros, I should note off the bat that he is a West Point grad, a Vietnam War veteran, and was appointed to positions by multiple Republican presidents, including Reagan and Bush, not to mention Donald Trump. That his credibility would ever be questioned is a joke, to say the least, which makes his testimony to the House Intelligence Committee all the more damning for Trump. Ambassador Taylor begins his testimony by saying, in no uncertain terms, that withholding aid in exchange for help with a domestic political campaign would be crazy, a sentiment that mirrors exactly what he said in a text message to Trump donor turned ambassador to the EU who, for some reason unbeknownst to anyone, was dealing with Ukraine, Gordon Sondland. And I'm just gonna go out on a limb here and say that he's probably right that it would be crazy considering the President of the United States is about to get impeached for just that. In other words, it seems like Bill Taylor's instincts were pretty spot on, yet another testament to his credibility. Taylor goes on to admit under oath that Trump did insist Zelensky make an announcement of an investigation into Joe Biden. And that's the whole ballgame. That is the quid pro quo. That is the extortion. That is Trump withholding desperately needed military aid to a country that was under attack until he got a soundbite that he could play on repeat leading up to the 2020 election. Taylor even goes on to say that Trump was more interested in that soundbite than he was in Ukraine in general, which is actually new information since Bill Taylor's deposition. But while it might be new, it's not the least bit surprising. There are only so many times that we can confirm what we already know, that this wasn't in the least bit about fighting corruption as it was helping tilt the next election in Trump's favor. In other words, these claims by the right and by the White House that Trump was simply championing anti-corruption efforts are complete BS. His actions are the literal definition of corruption. But let's just humor Trump for a second. Let's say that he was a fierce advocate of fighting corruption. Name one other instance where he's done just that. Or are we really supposed to believe that the champion of anti-corruption had only ever occupied himself with one single instance of corruption, and it was in Eastern Europe, and just so happened to deal with his current top political opponent heading into the next election? What a coincidence that must have been. Taylor then states that in his years of service, he's never seen foreign aid conditioned on the personal interests of the President of the United States, and maybe, just maybe, the reason for that is that it is extortion and clearly impeachable. If presidents could use millions upon millions of taxpayer-funded dollars as leverage for their own interests, they probably would. But there's a reason it's unprecedented in American history, and that's because I'm guessing most presidents aren't ignorant enough of the law or desperate enough not to care, or some combination of the two, to risk their presidency for a leg up in the next election. But apparently, Trump is. And so Democrats will continue to bring witnesses forward who will corroborate, to a damning degree, what we already know to be true. That Trump tried to extort Ukraine into doing his political bidding by withholding military aid to a country under siege by Russia until he got the announcement of an investigation into his top political opponent, Joe Biden. It is unprecedented. It runs counter to American foreign policy, and it is, beyond any shadow of a doubt, an offense that warrants the impeachment of the President of the United States.